We have invited Alzheimer's specialist, Alzheimer's Association Family Support Volunteer, Lisa Sobhian, is that right?
Sobhian, yeah, very close.
Yeah, for a presentation on the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. Since 2007, Lisa has been in charge of Alzheimer's care at Dual Life and Wellness Community at Lowell, where she is the Director of Alzheimer's and Dementia Care Services and Director of Life Enrichment Programs. As a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association for last 10 years, Lisa has been a part of its committee for the Walk to End Alzheimer's as chairperson, as currently their mission chair, and a dementia ambassador. Lisa's passion is working to bring awareness and education to the public about Alzheimer's disease and sharing her determination that there is a reason to hope for treatment and a care. There are handouts on the table by the door behind you. Thank you for joining us. Take over.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. As was said, there are handouts. There's.
Do you want the lights to dim?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea if we dim the lights a little bit. If anybody can't see, let me know. So there is a sign up in the back. There is program registration and a survey for the end. Registering is really important for future grants for the Alzheimer's Association. And again, no one will be contacting you unless you write on your form, please contact me. So you don't have to worry about that. Just a few housekeeping tips. I think everybody knows where the bathroom is. And if anybody has a question during the talk, I'm glad to discuss it at the moment. If it's something I know we're going to be discussing, I may ask you to wait. But feel free to ask anything as we go along. I would like to start by just getting a feel for who is in the room. If you're comfortable, raise your hand if you're here because you're caring for somebody that has some form of dementia. Okay, all right. Raise your hand if you are concerned about somebody or yourself or just want more information. Okay, great. Oh, I think that's so wonderful that people are coming out just to get more information. Certainly, I always think knowledge is power. So again, welcome to Know the 10 Signs, Early Detection Matters, sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association, the Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapter. The Early Detection Project is so important because currently so many people go undiagnosed for years, and they really lose valuable time that could be spent planning for the future and managing their symptoms. In 2008, the Alzheimer's Association received support to begin an education campaign highlighting the importance of early detection. And we're really thankful for Jay Smith, who really spearheaded this campaign. His wife, Patty, was diagnosed at age 51, 2 years after she first showed symptoms of this disease. And this is a quote from Jay that I think is very pertinent. He said, "If we could have had a correct diagnosis even 2 years earlier, it would have given us more time to plan, to do the things that can result in a good quality of life and to accomplish things we always wanted to do that got put off for this reason or that." And so I kind of think that almost sums up why we're here tonight, but certainly we'll go into more details about that. So thank you again to Jay Smith. Today you're going to have the opportunity to hear from people with the disease and their family members talking about life with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. It's really a chance to see people sharing their experiences from the first signs of concern through diagnosis and then through kind of managing this disease process. And for some of you, this may sound familiar. For some of you, it may offer new perspectives on the way to look at things. And we're going to see how people have really adapted themselves and their daily activities and their view of themselves in terms of Alzheimer's disease. So our first clip shows Marianne, who is living with Alzheimer's disease. She is going to talk about the stigma associated with the disease.
With a disease that takes your self, that's pretty scary stuff. And I think that the next wave of people with the help of the association is going to, the next wave of this disease is going to be to not be the only one you know who has it. You know, that we're going to get comfortable enough, and if we who can speak enough, and people say, well, she's not shirking, she can put two words together, she's still living, she's still out there, he's still talking, she's still writing, and there are people doing all of this, then I think the stigma, because that's a word we haven't said, will be lessened. I think it will be diminished. We don't blame people for having cancer. We don't turn the other way. We have historically done that with Alzheimer's disease. And I think that day is gone, and I think that we who live now and know about this are going to be part of the change.
So I think that's really important when I hear Marianne speak, because for a long time there was a stigma attached with this. I don't know how many of you have known people who years ago wouldn't want to tell anybody when they had this disease. There was kind of that stigma associated with it. And we're hearing that less and less now. People are much more open, I think partly because of all of the education. And what Marianne says is very salient. You know, she wants to be part of that change, that getting rid of that stigma. And at some point, you know, the next wave is you won't be the only one that you know that's dealing with this. People will, you know, be much more forward speaking about it and sharing with each other, and that's really important. I'd like to start by looking at the differences between Alzheimer's disease and typical aging. I'm going to ask you this first. Is it normal to get Alzheimer's as you get older, or to get dementia? No. That's great. It is not. And when I first started doing talks about 12 years ago, a lot of people still thought it was, and I think that's a testament to how far we've come with education. But there's the myth versus the reality is having a little touch of dementia is a typical part of aging. But we know that it is not a normal way to age, to get dementia. Of course, as we age, many of our physical capabilities, including our memory, diminish. We may have a harder time remembering certain things, but that's very different than having a form of dementia like Alzheimer's disease. For a long time, people used to think that it was normal. If you lived to a certain age, you would get, what did they used to call it, senile dementia or hardening of the arteries. And it was kind of assumed if you lived to a certain age, you were going to get that. Now, of course, we know that people did not live as long. It was a much smaller population that lived to the numbers of years that they do now, back 70, 80, 90 years ago. So we also know now that dementia is more than just memory. And for, whoops, let me go back for a second. For many years that we thought, you know, at least having some of those changes was inevitable. But we know that the symptoms that we see that are associated with this disease are not normal, and we're going to talk about that. So what is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease is a disease of the brain, and it progressively destroys brain cells, causing problems with memory, thinking, behavior, reasoning, language, lapses in judgment. There may be personality changes. As the disorder progresses, new areas of the brain are affected. Memory and language problems will worsen as time goes on. There may be disorientation, and as I said, personality changes, which can be difficult to deal with. So dementia is a general term that is used to describe a decline in cognitive functioning. Dementia is almost like an umbrella term. Dementia itself is not a specific disease. Dementia describes the fact that someone is having problems with thinking and memory and reasoning and language. But you need a disease that is causing these symptoms. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. And there are other forms of dementia too. So if you think of dementia like an umbrella of the particular symptoms, you need a disease that's causing those symptoms. So if I said to you, I have dementia, do I definitely have Alzheimer's disease? Not necessarily. But if I said to you, I have Alzheimer's disease, do I definitely have a form of dementia? Yes. Okay. That's a very important distinction to know. All right, let's look at another myth. I do want to say, too, that there are some treatments available to help with symptoms, but Alzheimer's disease is eventually fatal. All right, myth. If I have memory loss, that means I have Alzheimer's disease or dementia. The reality, many people have trouble with memory loss, but it doesn't mean they have Alzheimer's disease. Most do not. That's why it is really best to visit a doctor to determine the cause of the memory loss symptoms. What are some of the risk factors? So, even though it is not normal to get Alzheimer's as we get older, the primary risk factor is age. And there are currently over 5.7 million Americans, and that number is estimated by the year 2050 to jump to almost 14 million. That is an incredible number. There is a form of Alzheimer's called younger onset Alzheimer's, which is very unusual, and it totals less than 10% of all cases. The typical age you see someone with Alzheimer's developing is 65 and older, although you can get it younger. Interestingly enough, the incidence is higher in women than men. Now, what is the typical thing that people would normally say the reason for that would be? Any ideas? Women live longer than men, right? So that is what we used to think was causing that discrepancy. And they're finding, research is finding now that that is not actually the only reason. They need to do more research, but there is evidence looking at some of the differences in men and women, some of the hormones that women may have. Also, men typically younger than 65 may have more heart issues than women, and if men live past 65 without that, they may have more heart protection than women. So there's multiple factors causing that, and science definitely has to look into that much more. Some other factors may be that will affect someone's risk of dementia could be socioeconomic factors affecting people's ability to provide themselves with good medical care and proper diet and intellectual stimulation. All right, another myth versus reality. If Alzheimer's runs in your family, genetic testing will tell you whether you will get Alzheimer's disease. So the reality is, if you have a close family member with the disease, there is an increased risk for you. However, there are other important risk factors too. Other than the rare exception of younger onset Alzheimer's disease, which is a hereditary illness, there is currently no genetic test which will tell you whether or not you will get Alzheimer's disease. So scientists have discovered a gene that is linked to a greater risk of late onset Alzheimer's disease. They found 3 genes related to that. And if you carry that gene, it does not mean you're necessarily going to get this disease. You could have the gene and never get the disease. And that's really important because it's not like we have a genetic test now to determine if you're going to get a certain age, you're going to get it. There are 3 genes also linked to early onset Alzheimer's, which typically hits people in their 40s and 50s. And if someone has this gene, they're 95 to 100% going to get it. Now this, as I said, is a rare form of the disease. Currently, there's about 450 to 500 families in the United States that carry this genetic mutation, and most of them are fully aware of it. So that is a very different genetic path than late onset Alzheimer's. That is more of the typical. Does anybody have any questions on that? I want to make sure I'm clear on that. Okay. So certainly if someone is considering genetic testing, they really want to discuss that with their doctor and a genetic counselor because there's so many ramifications. Body-brain connection. There is scientific evidence that links brain health to heart health. You know, our brain is nourished by one of our body's richest networks of blood vessels. And we've heard for years about what's good for, you know, taking care of our heart, right? Heart health, we hear about that all the time. Well, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And we're now hearing a lot about brain health. We want to protect our brains from these neurological diseases that cause brain failure. The risk of developing Alzheimer's or vascular dementia is actually higher with conditions that cause increased damage to the heart or blood vessels, like high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, high cholesterol, all of those things. So part of brain health is trying to keep yourself healthy and those numbers in checks. Interestingly, African Americans have twice the risk of dementia and Latinos have a risk that's 1.5 times as higher as the rate of older whites. And that is, they found, because there tends to be higher percentages of hypertension and diabetes. And if those populations get those factors under control, their risk then becomes the same as other people. So that is just another link to show us why those heart healthy things are so important for our brain. Okay, so early detection comes before the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. It is really personal acknowledgement of possible symptoms of Alzheimer's, coupled with the willingness to talk about it and take action. And that can be really hard. So let's look at the 10 warning signs. We're going to get into the meat of this talk now. The 10 warning signs of dementia. So warning sign number 1, memory changes that disrupt daily life. So with typical aging, someone might forget names or an appointment, but typically remember them later. Have you ever been, sitting and watching TV, and then you walk into the kitchen, and then you get there and you're like, I have no idea why I just walked in this room, right? Okay, what do? Yeah, go back where you come from. I actually walk backward. I don't know what that does. I've yet to trip, which is good. But or you go back to the room, or maybe some people just stand there, and what happens? It kind of pops into your brain, right? You don't actually have to do something for your brain to kick in and remember it. Because our brain is able to do that. Our brain is healthy. It's able to figure out what we went into that room for. And I do that all the time. Sometimes you might temporarily forget your car in a parking lot. Anybody ever do that? Yeah. Yep. And then you find it, hopefully. Or you watched a movie and you wanted to tell somebody the name of that great actor and you can't remember it, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're like, right? Those are all kind of normal things that we go through. There are some changes as we get older. They're typically related to really trying to do too many things at once, maybe being tired, trying to multitask, being really stressed. That can affect us also. The difference is when these memory changes affect your ability to function in daily life. So forgetting something that's recently learned, people that really have a problem are not going to be able to retain that. People will be asking the same information over and over and over again in very short periods of time because they can't remember that. And really relying on things and family members that you used to handle alone. Now, we all may need more notes and reminders as we get older, right? I know if I'm walking down the hall at work and someone tells me something and I don't write it down, I'm gone by the time I get to my office. But that's okay, because if I've written it down, I know where it is and I can find it. So again, I can't stress it enough that it's memory changes that are disruptive to your daily life and your daily functioning, where you can't do it alone. Let's look at Sue, who has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and has a strategy to cope with this.
Well, I have a strategy I'm supposed to use. I have a hard time remembering to do it. But I have an apron and I have a tape recorder that I can stick in one pocket and a pad and a pencil in the other. And if I would just really be good at using that, I'd be in better shape. But that's my strategy for trying to remember what I wanted to do or what people said to me and that kind of thing.
So a couple points about Sue. One, I love her sense of humor. You know, she's on this journey with this disease, and she still has her sense of humor intact, which I think is wonderful. And the fact that she has a strategy, but she can't always remember it. So that's the difference. You know, we may carry a notepad because I want to write things down to remember it, but I know I have that notepad, and I know I need to look at it. So she's got this strategy, but sometimes she forgets to utilize it. She forgets that she has that. So utilizing the strategies can be part of the challenges. All right. Warning sign number 2, challenges in planning or solving problems. With typical aging, someone may make occasional errors, maybe when balancing a checkbook. Do people even use checkbooks anymore? But you know, those things that we need to plan, or for example, if I said, let's have a party on Friday night, what do we need to do? We need to figure out who we're going to invite, where we're going to have it, right? What we're going to eat, what we're going to wear, what time, all of that. We could probably sit here and rattle that off pretty quickly. Someone with Alzheimer's is going to experience a change in those abilities to plan. They may have trouble following a familiar recipe because the ability to sequence is going to be affected. They may lose track of following monthly bills. You know, there's certainly a difference between being overwhelmed by the bills you have to pay and being able to actually keep track of them. They may have difficulty concentrating or just taking so much longer than before to do the common tasks that they always did. I worked with a gentleman who said his wife always took care of the finances in the house and was pretty meticulous with it. And he realized there was a problem when, for some reason, I guess the bank had called and there was an issue with the bank, and he checked her checkbook balancing, and it was just, no one could figure it out. It looked like they had so much more money than they actually did, but they actually wound up having to close the account because they couldn't figure it out. And that's how, for them, that was a really big warning sign that there was definitely a problem here, because that was something that was very familiar and easy for her. You know, in terms of sequencing, how many of you have to think about whether you put your socks or your shoes on first? That's an example of something that will become difficult potentially for somebody. All right, so let's look at number 3, difficulty completing familiar tasks. So typical aging. Occasionally you need help to use the settings on a microwave or record a television show. Or maybe, you know, you once in a while do something on your phone, or you don't typically have a smartphone, and you know, you don't use it all the time, and so you have to be reminded, but you can get it. Those typical daily tasks that you've always done, though, those will become a problem, like driving to a familiar location that you've always driven to. Suddenly people may become lost and not know where they are. Managing a budget at work where you've always done that. Or remembering the rules to a favorite game that you play all the time. So what I'm trying to show is how it's these changes from what has always been kind of familiar and easy to do. Let's look at Joyce, who lives with Alzheimer's and vascular dementia also, and she talks about being surprised by having this warning sign.
The biggest challenge is in reading and in doing simple tasks like just counting change. That's really hard for me. I can balance a checkbook. If someone gives me a series of coins, I have a hard time really figuring out how much change I should get. That's so, for somebody with a PhD, that's like crazy. And I think it's hard for me to come to grips with that.
So, listening to her speak, it's hard to imagine that she has trouble with coins, isn't it? Yeah. And everyone is so different. What some people experience, others may not. I always like to say, when you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've truly met one person, because everybody is such an individual, and everybody's journey is so individual. So that's really important. But there can be really unexpected changes with this disease, and meeting the challenges can be an emotional adjustment, for sure. And it sounds like, you know, Joyce is definitely dealing with that. Number 4, confusion with time or place. With typical aging, a person may sometimes get confused about the day of the week, but figure it out later. You know, you might be on vacation or you're retired and you're not required to keep track of the days of the week. But if you needed to figure it out, you could. You could say, hey, let me look at my watch, or let me grab the newspaper, or something like that. Or think back, gee, I know 2 days ago Saturday, so it must be Monday. People with Alzheimer's can really lose track of dates, the seasons, the passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something if it's not happening immediately. So something that's happening, you know, you're going to be going to the doctor at 4 o'clock on Thursday. They may know they have to go to the doctor, but they can't hold on to that kind of reference point to where it is, which is why sometimes those constant repetitive questions may happen. Sometimes they may forget where they are, how they got there. And that can be really scary, really scary. Number 5, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. Typical aging, we've got vision changes that may happen related to aging of the eyes, like cataracts, right? We may have glaucoma, macular degeneration. There's different things that can happen. As we age, our bodies age, and all the parts in there age also. So our eyes definitely are affected by that. But for some people, their eyes may be fine. It's how they're processing what they see, because there's a part of the brain back here called the occipital lobe that takes in the images and what we see and processes it to make sense of it for us. So people may have difficulty reading. They may have difficulty judging distance, determining color, contrast. Perception and distance have very real implications for driving. You know, someone may say, well, it's easy, I can drive because I can get in. What do? Turn the car on, you put your foot on one of the pedals, you move the steering wheel, right? But that's not all there is. You have to remember what the signs mean. You have to remember to, turn and look behind you and use your mirrors and respond when something happens really quickly. And all that input can be overwhelming to somebody with this disease and make for driving to be very risky. And they actually have places where people can go, whether they have Alzheimer's or other medical issues, to see if it's still safe for them to be driving. All right. New problems with words in speaking or writing. So sometimes we all have trouble finding the right word, right? I know for me, if I'm tired, I have more trouble with that. I've always had that. So that's kind of normal for me. But for some people, with this disease, they really start to lose those words and start to substitute different words in there. People may stop in the middle of a conversation and lose their train of thought. Now, we can all do that too, but this is something that is happening frequently, and not being able to get back on track. Not knowing how to continue, or they might have told you a story and it sounds great, but then 5 minutes later they're repeating the same exact thing. Might say the wrong name, like call a watch a hand clock. We're going to watch Joyce again, because she's going to first talk about how she first noticed a particular warning sign.
My sister, who lives in North Carolina, I live in New York, I sent her an email. And apparently she showed it to my brother-in-law. And she called me and said that email made no sense at all. And one of the things that I neglected to tell you was that I would do write emails, things that normally took me about 2 minutes to do. It would take me a half an hour, 45 minutes, and I'd have to read it over, and there was no guarantee it was okay. So I had another person at work read over it, and so it was hard. It was hard, and that's when I realized I thought my emails were fine. Then my sister started telling me, and everybody. So I said, "It's not. Things aren't coming out right."
Okay, so as Joyce said, it was something that she always did very quickly, that suddenly she really had trouble doing. And she didn't notice it at first. It was her sister who pointed out to her. And sometimes denial kicks in. Insight may be impaired, especially if people go too long with the symptoms before they start to talk about it. They may not have the insight anymore to understand that there's a problem. So, needing to ask for assistance with tasks that you never had to before can be an indication of a problem. 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. So, typical aging, sometimes we misplace things from time to time, such as a pair of glasses or the remote control. I can't tell how many times the remote control winds up being in the couch somewhere, or you've walked into the other room with it and put it down and then you've forgotten that you've done that. That happens. I think it's a good thing I wear progressives now, because if my glasses weren't on me all the time, I probably would be looking for them all the time. But a person with Alzheimer's disease may put things in very unusual places, like the frying pan and the freezer. They may lose things and be unable to retrace their steps. If you put your keys down somewhere and you can't find them, you might be able to, if you don't have the disease, think, okay, wait, I walked in the house from the garage and I had my keys in my hand. Oh, I went upstairs, right? You can retrace those steps and figure them out. So sometimes people may also start accusing others of stealing their things because they don't remember that they have misplaced it. And again, this may occur more frequently over time as time goes on. Number 8, decreased or poor judgment. Typical aging, we all make a bad decision once in a while. I think certainly our teenagers make bad decisions a lot, but then we get better for a few decades. But as we get older, we may make a bad decision, especially when it comes to like telemarketers and scam artists and stuff like that. People with Alzheimer's are going to experience changes in judgment and decision making that are really going to affect their daily life. So they may start to be unable to choose clothing that's appropriate for the weather. You might see somebody and it's 90 degrees and they're layered up, not realizing that they kind of need to drink. So those judgments are, spending money more impulsively. I've heard so many scenarios where people have said, they found their loved one was going to the bank every day and withdrawing large sums of money and nobody knew where it was going to. Number 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. So with typical aging, people may feel weary periodically with work or family or social engagements. I don't feel like going to that. A person with Alzheimer's may remove themselves from these activities and hobbies because they're having trouble keeping up with the conversation, or they can't keep up with the favorite sports team anymore and what's going on. They just can't engage in that favorite hobby anymore. And it's just becoming harder for them to follow it. So that's why they may be avoiding those social situations. And finally, number 10, changes in mood and personality. So typical aging may involve developing very specific ways of doing things and becoming irritable when a routine is disrupted. Right? We got to get set in our ways as we get older. For someone with Alzheimer's, their mood and personality may actually drastically change, or it may get much more accentuated, what they've always had. And this may really be the hardest for families to deal with. People can increasingly display signs of confusion, of being suspicious, fear, anxiety, agitation, sometimes aggression. And this is particularly so when people are out of their comfort zone in new situations. Any questions on the 10 warning signs before we move on? Yes?
My question is, when some of these symptoms start, are they then there and they get worse, or they become constant, or does somebody have those symptoms for a week or two and then they go away, and then 3 or 4 months later you start to see it?
That's a really good question. I think certainly what you start to see is more and more frequency. So, I don't know that, someone has it for a week and then it's completely gone. But you start to see signs of it. And in the beginning, it's very hard to necessarily discern. Because in the beginning, it may be, well, that's just a one-off. We all have, sometimes this happens. Or we may not see how frequently it's happening because we're not, with the person all the time. But it's typically things that you start to say, and then you start to say, more and more. And that's the way I look at it. And certainly if anyone has any questions at all after this, and there's information in the back. The Alzheimer's Association has a wonderful helpline that can answer any questions, and I'll talk about that toward the end. So, all right. So what do we do if we see these signs in ourselves or someone else? And first and foremost, we want to talk about it. Talk about what we're seeing and what we're thinking. I know there's a fear there. Nobody wants to admit that potentially they could have Alzheimer's disease, but breaking the silence helps people get the medical care that they need. It may be that they have something that's totally fixable, that is not Alzheimer's disease, and you don't want to waste precious time not getting that help. And no matter what the disease or the diagnosis, it's crucial to get that help. And I think because people are afraid to talk about it or not talking about it, that is holding people back from getting the help that they need. And so first and foremost, we need to break that silence. And certainly when somebody's experiencing it early on, it is sometimes easier to have those conversations because they still have more insight and ability. Although it can, as I said, it can be very scary. But as we're going to talk about, more often than not, someone with memory issues, it's not Alzheimer's, it's something else. Let's look at Susan giving some advice for families for the changes they see.
I would hope that families could be gentle but straightforward. I would hope that they wouldn't minimize the challenge of this or make it larger than it needs to be. So I guess I would say you have to be aware the changes are coming, but they're coming, inch by inch, and sometimes foot by foot. But most often, you just have to talk about it. Not to be afraid to talk about it, not to be worried about how to talk about it, but talk about it. Because if you don't, I think that there's going to be 1 or 2 days where you just find there are arresting moments and you have no idea where to put that or how to manage that. Not to be afraid, just to talk.
So, that probably sounds easier than it is, but it's so important, as Susan says, just be straightforward. I think there's some concerns here, and let's go talk about it. And of course, at most talks that I do, people say, well, I've got a loved one, and they're not willing to go to the doctor, and all. So there's always those kinds of situations. There are also a lot of people I've met that have seen signs in themselves, and they've gone to take care of it, and talk to loved ones about it, and it's really been helpful. So I can't stress enough how important it is to have these conversations. And I think the conversations will be easier to have the more it's out in the public, and the more people like yourselves come to talks. You're getting the education that if you have somebody in your life, it's going to give you the tools to deal with that. So, diagnosis. Earlier is better. After detecting some of the warning signs, the next step is getting a thorough assessment from a doctor. The diagnosis may not be Alzheimer's at all. It may be completely different, But no matter what it turns out to be, that early diagnosis is critical. So here's another myth for you. There's no point in getting diagnosed because dementia is not curable or treatable. It will just upset my family and me, so why do it? Well, the reality is there are a number of very good reasons to get a diagnosis, and we're going to talk about them right now. And it's the only way to get that treatment for any diagnosis. So once the person has the symptoms and they see a doctor, they may discover they don't have dementia at all, but another illness. Some of the illnesses that can cause memory problems are very treatable and can be reversed, like depression or thyroid problems. There's other things that we may have, sometimes malnutrition in older people, vitamin deficiencies. And some of these things, if we don't treat, they will go on to have permanent problems. So that's why it's so important. So we certainly don't want to ignore these symptoms. Another myth, you don't need a complete set of diagnostic tests to know if you have Alzheimer's disease. You can just try a medication for memory loss, and if it works, you know. So reality, early treatment is best, but you need to know what you are treating. There are many things that cause memory loss, and it's important to be thoroughly assessed. And I know I keep kind of repeating the same thing, but it's so important. I want to kind of get that kind of drummed in. And there are some illnesses, some types of dementia that if you take a particular medication you think might be helpful for memory problems will make things worse or not work for it. So that's why it's really important. This is Gary. He has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and he's going to tell you about the time it takes to get a diagnosis.
And he actually for 6 months called this mild cognitive impairment. And I kept seeing him every 6 months, and he finally, maybe the second visit or the third visit, he said, I hate to tell you this, but you are early onset Alzheimer's. And I asked him why he didn't say that in the first meeting, and he said to me, a lot of doctors are too fast about assuming that's what it is without further testing, because you can have the symptoms and it can come from the drugs you're taking, and they can take you off those drugs and your mind will be fine. And there's other things that can happen to give you the symptoms of early onset Alzheimer's, and it really isn't. It can be corrected. And he just wanted to be sure before he did anything.
So doctors do need to take their time in making a diagnosis. They really need to rule out other things to figure out what it is, because you don't want to make a misdiagnosis. So physicians can almost always determine if the person has dementia, but it can be difficult to determine the exact cause of the dementia. There's no single test that you can just take and say, yep, you have Alzheimer's. It's a series of tests that need to be done. You need to see your primary care doctor and rule out all these other things. And like Gary said, it could be a medication interaction or side effect. And sometimes older people are taking many over-the-counter medications and not aware of what might interact with their prescription medication. So the doctor will do a workup and see if it's any of those things. And if it is not, then you really want to look at a mental status exam, which kind of asks different questions just to see where you are. A neurological exam. The neurologist is going to take those pictures. Maybe it's a CAT scan or an MRI or PET scan. They can see things in the brain. They can see whether there's something else going on, a tumor perhaps, or they can see, gee, this looks like patterns we might see for somebody who has this particular type of dementia. Or they may say, gee, there's absolutely nothing going on there. Let's look at other reasons why you may be experiencing this. And they're going to assess the person's well-being. Are there any, psychiatric issues that are there that could be causing some of this? If someone is older and seriously depressed, they're going to be kind of apathetic and maybe get somewhat confused and lose interest in things. And so you want to kind of rule that out also. Neurological exam, the person's also going to look at the reflexes and coordination and balance and eye movement and speech. So those tests help us to say, rule out all of these other things and say it is most likely this. And that can take a while. So physicians may look and find other disorders, including anemia. Excess use of alcohol can be a problem. And again, medication side effects, and sometimes certain infections can cause these problems. So they're going to look at all of that. So there are other important forms of dementia. There's many, many, but some of the most common ones. Vascular dementia, which frequently can exist along with Alzheimer's disease, typically develops when there is a stroke that impairs blood flow to parts of the brain, or lots of little mini strokes that you might not even know someone's having. I want to clarify, you can have a stroke and never have dementia. That's very important to note. I kind of want people leaving here and saying, oh, there's a stroke and that means dementia. That does not mean that, but it can happen. It accounts for about 10% of all cases of dementia. Mixed dementia, more than one type of dementia at the same time. Frontal temporal lobar degeneration, which used to be called frontal temporal dementia. So frontal temporal lobar, oh my goodness, it's a mouthful, FTLD, which has symptoms that have marked changes in personality, mood, behavior, difficulty with producing or comprehending language. Those you may see first, rather than the memory issues that you might see with Alzheimer's. So with Alzheimer's, you typically will see that short-term memory issue first. Long-term may be intact for quite some time, but short-term is what you notice first to go. So with other dementias like FTLD, you're seeing the personality changes, sometimes behavioral changes first. And that one you might see people in their 50s developing. So suddenly they're not coping the way they normally would at work. Dementia with Lewy Body, yes?
Could you go back one slide just for a second?
Sure can.
You were talking about the alternative, that's the one, thanks.
Yep. Do you have a question on that, or you just wanted to look at it?
So, but I mean,
Okay.
that's the thing, because so many of these, the last four that you just hit right there were really hit home, for the number of instances.
Sure. Yeah,
For
I mean.
example, I know medication side effects is a major
Yep.
issue, yeah,
Yep.
especially on the over-the-counter side.
We don't process certain vitamins the way we did when we're older, the way we did when we were younger. So sometimes those vitamin deficiencies can, especially vitamin B12, that can be a big issue. And we, kind of want to make sure that's there. That's why some people have those shots, because even taking the vitamin doesn't work. And vitamin B12, if that is left unchecked for a long period of time, you can have a dementia, permanent dementia related to that. Yep.
An example of an infection that you're referring to?
So urinary tract infections sometimes in the elderly can cause massive confusion. Yeah. So it just, the whole chemistry in the person's body is very different. You might not see, typically with someone younger, you have pain and maybe fever. You might not see that with someone older.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Okay, so dementia with Lewy bodies, which have symptoms of visual hallucinations, stiffness, kind of the shuffling, sleep disorders. People may act out dreams while they're awake, but very vivid visual hallucinations. People may, in the beginning, fall a lot. So actually, it has features that look like Parkinson's and features that look like Alzheimer's. So it can be difficult to diagnose at times. And I think they're getting better at diagnosing it, because we're noticing it is around a lot more than we thought it was. So not everyone who seeks diagnosis, again, will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. However, for those who are, there are things that can be done to improve function and care. So with early diagnosis, you can get the maximum benefit from the available treatments that are there. Explore treatments to provide a relief in symptoms. There are some medications that can help symptoms, whether it's, you're not going to slow the disease down, but you can affect some of the symptoms, so the person may be able to function a little bit more independently for a while. Early treatment may help individuals remain independent longer, and that may be setting up the home so it's what we call dementia friendly. So the environment is, they're able to function in it. and not have to, clutter can be really hard because you can't find something easily. That's just one example. Or things that are contrasting in color. Doing that may be helpful. So all of those things can really help somebody be independent longer. And an early diagnosis can help someone participate perhaps in clinical trials. I have a friend who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and she was able to participate in a clinical trial that she felt really actually made a little bit of an impact. So you have that ability if you've gotten the diagnosis earlier. This is Justine. She's 75, and she's going to talk about the importance of an early diagnosis.
Early diagnosis is very important, because it's like with anything, if you start early, you'll have more success in the treatment of it. And with Alzheimer's, there is no cure, but it can be made livable. The medication can help you live a more productive life with it.
So there are some medications designed to help relieve some of the symptoms. None of them are going to stop the progression, however. There's cholinesterase inhibitors, N-methyl deaspirate receptor antagonists. Big words, right? But they may possibly temporarily improve symptoms. Sometimes you don't know if they're working until the person comes off of them. Other medications can help with mood and behavior changes. So talking to the doctor will really help in terms of what treatment is best for somebody, and the different options there. With an early diagnosis, people have more time to consider and plan for the future. And for me, this is the most, me personally, important part. I think it allows the person to take part in making decisions about their future and about what they want right now and how they want to live. They can talk about, their living arrangements, what they want for safety in the future, financial and legal matters. Take care of those before someone else has to make those decisions for you. And that can be really hard for family to make those decisions later on when they are not sure what the person wanted. Having those really tough conversations while you still can. This is what I want for myself when I get to this point. This is what I don't want. It's kind of a gift to give that to your family members or the people who are going to be making your decisions. Figuring out who you want to be your voice and make your decisions. Getting all that paperwork done, your healthcare proxies, your power of attorneys, all of that. And being empowered to make those decisions, because the earlier you get a diagnosis, the more you're still able to talk to people and see what's out there and see what alternatives you have and be a part of that. And honestly, build the right care team and social network and get things set up for the future. So I think that's really, really important. Again, the legal and financial planning for the future is so important. You need to, identifying and completing legal documents, seeking legal advice and services, and it's empowering to be able to still be able to do that for yourself and not wait until a crisis situation. So let's look at some resources that are out there to help, because there are so many. Has anybody here ever contacted the Alzheimer's Association? Okay. They've got a ton of resources. I'll name a few, but first of all, they have their helpline, their 24-hour, 7-day-a-week helpline, which is completely free. And you can call them. It's staffed by master's level clinicians, and you can ask them a question. Hey, I read about this medication. Can you get me some information? Or I'm looking for a support group. Can you get me, on the right track? Or even, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you haven't slept and you're just at your wit's end and you need someone you can scream at on the phone. They're there. Believe me, I've known people who've done that. Then there's the Community Resource Finder, which is great. Let's say you need to find a neurologist. You don't know where to start. They've already found all of that. You put in your zip code, how far you want to be. They're not going to tell you which one to go to, but they've already done that legwork. Or you want to find an adult day health program for a loved one. all of them are in there already. They have a multitude of support groups. I actually run a support group here in Chelmsford the second Wednesday of the month, right in town. It's listed on the Alzheimer's Association website under support groups. If anyone wants more information at the end, please let me know. We're always willing to have people come to that. It's for caregivers. We do it in the evening, so it's nice if people are working. There are online support groups if people can't get to one in person. They have a safety center, where you can actually register someone. Nobody wakes up and says, today is the day I'm going to wander. So it's really important if someone's living with this disease to make sure they're kind of registered with the Alzheimer's Association and the local police. We have an officer in town who is there for older people, and you can register them, and that way if something does happen, we can mobilize things really quickly. They will meet with you, the Alzheimer's Association, at no cost. So if you are struggling yourself or caring for somebody, and you are struggling maybe because you're trying to figure out how to keep the person at home safely, they'll meet with you. As I said, no cost, and they'll talk to you about all the different things that you can take advantage of. There's tons of free online education programs. So all of these things are on their website. For those of you that enjoy using the computer, otherwise you can call them. They have advocates who are working really hard with local and national legislation to create bills and things to help get Alzheimer's to the forefront. Right now it's the 6th leading cause of death, and out of the top 10 causes of death, it is the only one that currently does not have a treatment or a cure. So that is great for all the other ones right now, the other 9 that we've put so much funding into in research, and now we really need to kind of focus on that. So there is the Walk to End Alzheimer's, if anyone is interested. That's something I've been part of for several years. And it's the largest public awareness event and fundraising event. So what the proceeds all go to all of these resources and also to the research. The Alzheimer's Association is the largest nonprofit funder of research for this disease. So that is there too. People can get involved either with the committee or come that day, join a team. You don't have to know somebody with the disease to join a team, because with 5.7 million Americans right now with the disease, we all have a reason to kind of get involved with this. And again, if you notice signs in someone you love or yourself, talk about what's happening. See a doctor, find out what's happening and what to do about it. Follow up on all the diagnostic and treatment recommendations, and then again, follow up with resources from your local chapter. And that's pretty much it for tonight. I think we have one more clip. Here we go. This is Mimi. She has a diagnosis, and she's going to sum everything up for us.
My passion in life is to have people diagnosed as early as I was, so that the good part of their life can be extended. I wear an Alzheimer's bracelet every day that says there's reason to hope, and I think that's kind of my mantra, that if we can find the people that are out there, get them to a good place where the guy knows, the gal, whatever, knows what they're doing, and get diagnosed and get help.
So here is the 1-800 number for the Alzheimer's Association, and the website is not the website. There's information on the back table for that. I'll open this up to any questions that you might have. I'll turn the lights back on. If I can find the lights. Are they over there? Okay, thank you, Phil. Oh, much better. I can actually see everybody now. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
My father died from Alzheimer's 15, 20 years ago, and at the time, supposedly the only way to really be sure somebody had Alzheimer's is an autopsy with brain. I don't know what the term for it, and they would look for a certain type of plaque and so forth. It sounds like there's an earlier diagnosis, an earlier way to diagnose instead of be sure without
So-
having to wait until after the person dies to say, yeah, it really was.
So we can come, with our technology now, we can come pretty close, 94%, 98% positive by ruling things out and looking at, having the PET scans, and because we know, okay, this is what this kind of looks like. They finally have a way to see the plaques and tangles, but it's in research form and it's prohibitively expensive. So it's not out there for the general population to go and get diagnosed by that method. We still have to do a rule out, but because of technology, which has come so far in the last 15, 20 years, we can be very, very close. So yeah, they've been able to figure it out, but it's not out for the general public yet. So we are still doing the whole kind of ruling out and doing that. It's what's called the Pittsburgh compound.
What is it?
The Pittsburgh compound, my understanding, it's in research form. And that, again, is information that you can find on the website or even call the helpline for more information. But yeah, and I think we're a lot closer to being able to accurately diagnose because of the technology that we have and all of that. Good question. Yes?
Are there things you can do to prevent Alzheimer's?
So there's lots of things for prevention, and one of the things that the Alzheimer's and other organizations talk about now is brain health and prevention. You can certainly diet and exercise and keeping those kinds of trying to keep those things like your numbers, your cholesterol, your weight, your diabetes, sugar numbers, all of that in healthy ranges. Socializing, especially as we get older, is so important. We can build new networks of things in our brain, like our neurons can, new passageways can be built. So, trying new things. I tell people, if say you're an avid crossword puzzle person and you like to do the New York Times crossword puzzle and you do Monday all the time, well, you want to try Tuesday or Wednesday because that's harder, and it's challenging your brain. Learn a new language, drive a different route than you normally do somewhere, things like that. Again, exercise under your doctor's advice is really important also. So yes, there's absolutely things you can do to prevent. However, just because you're doing them doesn't mean you're not going to get it. Just as there might be people who are doing everything the doctors say not to do and never get it. However, the way I look at it is if I do all of these things, I would certainly, if I can prevent it for even a decade longer than I normally would have, that's great to me too. I'd rather get this in my 80s than in my 70s, for sure. But on the Alzheimer's Association website is lots of information about prevention. And if you don't use the computer, you can call their 800 number and they will send you lots of information. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other questions? All right, well, I thank you all for coming. If you could please make sure to fill out your surveys, that would be great. And there's material on the back for anyone who would like to take it home. Thank you for coming.